If we take the opinion polls, and we have a very recent poll, BVA, from the 23rd of April, 58% of the French people interviewed are in favor of the UK remaining, when 40% are in favor of the EU living. But if you take again the electorate of the Front National, 77% of the Front National voters are in favor of the UK leaving, and it's very interesting because they develop a sort of Anglophilie, presenting the UK as the country which really resists to Europe. But what is even more interesting is that when you take other questions in these polls, and here I can see a big difference between the French people and the German people, there is only 27% of the French who think that the UK living will have a negative impact for Europe. And this is important because if the result is no on the 23rd of June, I don't predict big concerns among the French society, and it will leave a margin of maneuver for the Eurosceptics, who will, of course, do a lot of activism. If we take the political establishment of the mainstream political parties, what are the main reasons for them to oppose Brexit? First, reasons has to do with policy issues. Defense, of course, is an important issue for the French. Well, it has been one of the raison d'être of the Franco-British bilateralism inside the EU. But what strikes me also is that the way the question is put in France is very different from what it was at the end of the 90s, when we had this Saint-Malo agreement between Jacques Chirac and Tony Blair. At this time, we were talking a lot about institutionalization of a European defense policy. Today, this time is a bit over. What is important for the French is that if the UK remains in the EU, it will facilitate operations. So we're not talking about institutionalization of a European defense policy anymore. Even if, and this is something which is probably not commented enough outside France, what is very important for France since the end of the second mandate of Jacques Chirac in this security and defense issue is to have a good relationship with Washington, D.C. And I have to say that the Franco-American relationships on security and defense is very good, and it's creating a debate in France about the new orientations of the French foreign policy, which goes against the old Gaullist paradigm. Nuclear energy is also an issue, a policy issue, which is frequently put as a reason to have the UK in the EU. And on trade policy, I have to say it's a bit more complicated, but you know that France is a country where it's always difficult for politicians to get legitimacy in saying that they are in favor of free trade, but in fact, when you take the concrete position of the French leaders, they supported a lot the liberalization of trade. So having a country like UK, which is, doing the job to a certain extent of going at the front and negotiating for liberalization of trade, is something which is useful for the French political leaders. So another reasons to to keep the UK in the EU. Second reasons, and here we go back to the history of the French relationship with the UK regarding the UK membership. The idea that after the NU crisis and the refugee crisis, clearly Germany took the lead of the EU, and this is something which is not very easy to accept by many people in Paris, as all the narrative about the EU leadership in France is co-leadership between France and Germany. So there is a fear that the Brexit could increase the Franco-German asymmetry in leadership, and a wish that Britain could balance the German leadership. Just as a footnote, because I said a word about the evolution of security and defense policy, if the French are so active in military operations abroad, it has to do with this leadership question as well, because they know that there is one field, one policy issues where German will not be high competitors, and this is precisely military affairs. I call it sometimes leadership of compensation. But the third and probably the most crucial argument for having the UK in the EU is to avoid referendum contagion, an increase of legitimacy of the French Eurosceptics, which are powerful in France, and most of the polls about the presidential elections of 2017 shows that Mrs. Le Pen can be at the second round of the presidential election. Just to give you some quantitative data, 53% of the French consider that it would be a positive decision to organize a referendum on French membership to the EU. And if we go a bit further, 32% of the French think that it's a right decision that the EU workers do not get welfare provision during the first 4 years of residence in another EU member state. 53% said we have to reduce access to welfare provision for EU workers. So you could see the impact also of the debate of renegotiation on the French public opinion. And of course, it's a challenge for the next presidential elections, because the discourse of the Eurosceptics will be, well, if Brexit succeeds, and if we have a no on the 23rd of June, why were the Brits successful in getting back their national sovereignty when we are not? This is something which will, of course, be very much used and developed in the public debate. Probably the only way for President Hollande to cope with that would have been to re-engage more France and to have a strong discourse about the benefits of the EU with new proposal for the development of the EU. But I doubt that he's going to do that. First reasons why he will not do that is because his own legitimacy is very weak. He's one of the most unpopular presidents of the Republic under the Fifth Republic. And it's even more important, the Parti Socialiste, his party, is divided on European issues. And you know, when you're a politician, that you have a party which is divided, well, you try not to speak about this issue. This is the best way to behave. So if Brexit succeeded on the 23rd of June, I don't think we'll have strong reaction from Paris, and that will not help, of course, the offensive coming from from the Eurosceptics, both in France and in most of the EU member states. We'll have to wait the next presidential election of May 2017, which means about 12 months, a sort of grey period where nothing will really come from Paris as a reaction to Brexit. And of course, in Germany, Markus is going to speak about that, I can imagine that we're going to wait also for the Bundestag election of September 2017. So that's what I could say briefly at this stage of the political debate and reactions in my country.
Thank you very much.
There's the debate between those who want to be out completely and those who want to be half out or half in. But from the German point of view, the UK has already left or is not going to be part of the Euro. It is not part of the Schengen area, and this is where the music plays. This is where the big issues are dealt with. The UK is already out. So it has got a fantastic deal, at present. And I think as a German taxpayer, and I think I'm not the only one who says, well, one of the big net contributors is Germany. We pay much more for this. And to say, well, you pay 10 billion euros, for having access to a huge market, it's great. It's really cheap, That is, I think, the overall attitude. So there is no better deal for the UK. I think that's a widespread conviction. You have already the best deal that you can get. Leaving will be worse. And why is that so? First of all, I think in the case of an exit, I think the German perspective is very much that solving both the issues of the Eurozone crisis and the Schengen issue will be a major preoccupation for the EU in the coming years. And Germany will have an enormous role in this and will devote enormous energies to this. So making deals with the UK, free trade deals or whatever we heard will be relatively low on the agenda. What we will see in the coming years, I think, is a much inward-looking EU that has to do with the big issues it has, and it cannot. I think the refugee crisis is different from the Euro crisis because the refugee crisis can be solved at the expense of third parties, namely the refugees. If you make an extreme solution, you can just try to close your borders. It is not nice, but you can do this. The Eurozone crisis is an internal crisis. We cannot escape it, and Germany is in. And that occupies really the attention very strongly. So it will be less interested in external effects. The other thing that comes to mind here is, and it had been dealt with, is the Swiss and the Norwegian model. And what the Swiss call this, I have to say this in German, I'm sorry, it's the autonoma Nachvollzug. It's the autonomous imitation, if you wish, of European Union legislation. So what the deal is in saying, well, we are not participating in the EU legislation anymore, we just enact it autonomously because we want to have access to the European market is not so easy to see. From a German point of view, the attitude, I think the German attitude is always, it's better to sit at the negotiation table and be a co-decision maker instead of being a decision taker and no decision shaper. And what seems to matter here probably is size, and you can make the argument that is also a bit that Swiss and Norway are very small countries. So what can they do? They cannot have a good deal with you because they're just so small. Well, there's a nice article. All of you who are really looking forward to read a very long and very windedly arguing scientific paper should read the article on the Brussels effect by US lawyer Anu Bradford. I can tell you the take-home message in short. It basically said that the EU is a very large market. It's Europe, it's the world's largest market or one of the largest market, and it has a strong regulating grip. It has a strong propensity for regulation. That means it is a global standard setter, even for the US. So US firms have to follow European standard in production, also in services. It's not just about clicking something and ordering it. Financial markets is service regulation. So if you're out, it basically means if the US is a decision taker and US firms are decision taker, what's in for the British position? That I think from the German point of view is difficult to understand. That's my first point. The second point is the whole debate, and also the debate this morning, really shows you what is well known to this. I mean, for me, I haven't experienced, I'm not that old, the first British referendum, but I've read a lot about it. And you really have the impression that in many respects, history repeats itself. Many of the arguments have been made already 40 years ago. They come back again and again. And I remember that I've written an article something like 30 years ago or so on different German and British attitudes towards the EU. You have the impression nothing has changed really, The German attitude or the UK attitude I know that not everybody has the attitude, but so to speak, of the leave camp, and also those who think, yeah, after all, we should say in. It's this idea that sovereignty first, you can be, and it's the idea that you can be sovereign and you can shape your fate, I think from the German point of view, and don't forget Germany is larger, and everybody thinks Germany is the European hegemon. That is an attitude that is difficult to understand. And I think it has not only to do with the fact of having lost 2 world wars. It's this idea that, and I'll come to this in a minute, Germany is too small to do this. We are too small. We do not have enough resources. We do not have enough power. Our market is too small. The second thing is about democracy. And we heard this again this morning. I think here the German attitude, it's a federal country. So you can have democracy at different levels, So there is no contradiction between some European imposition and the vibrant national democracy. The point is rather, for some decisions to be effective, you have to take them at a higher level, and intergovernmentalism, unanimity, and vetoes is not enough for effectiveness. You pay a high price of effectiveness for maintaining national vetoes. And in the German view, I think, there is a deal to be made. Democracy presupposes somehow effectiveness. If you are a very small country with a few 100,000 inhabitants and you take all your decisions by your parliament autonomously, you have formal democracy, but you have no way of shaping your fate. And I think the German view simply says, well, the price, of making compromise is a price that we're willing to pay. It's this attitude of a country that is used to a multi-tier system of government, and the EU is just one level in addition. That makes it so difficult, I think, for Germans to understand the British discourse. There is a strong sympathy, I think, in Germany for getting back powers to the national level. I think Germany is not the country that it used to be portrayed as at the times of Helmut Kohl, where everybody dreamt of the United States of Europe without really knowing what that was supposed to be. I think there's an increasing awareness that, as everybody says, the EU should be reformed, and getting powers back to the nation state or to member states is important, but without the EU, that case has less advocates. Third and last point, and it's a widespread Germany, which I think is a cross-party consensus. That is, the EU is an effort of maintaining influence in a world of changing powers and markets. To cut it short, we have rising powers and markets. You do not get a better deal with China by making yourself smaller. In a changing world economy, the larger, the better. Economies of scale matter. And as I just said, that is very much, I think, a consensus attitude amongst German politicians. All the problems that we have in the world need cooperation. They need working together, and working together means making compromises. And positions about, we can get better deals if we are smaller, I think, as I said already, are very difficult to understand. That has something to do with markets. So market size is really an issue. Being part of a big market is good, and if this is a market in services, well, that's even better. It also has to do with diplomacy and multilateral aid. I was one of those people who thought for many years, the European foreign policy and European external action service. I think somebody once said that there are more people doing research on European foreign policy than people who are actually doing this. But I think if you read a bit and if you try to get the facts, that's not true. When you look at numbers of diplomats, you can really see the big 3, Germany, France, and the UK, do not have diplomatic missions in many countries of the world, really in many countries of the world. The European diplomatic service is almost as big as each of the big member states. And even there, saving costs, getting your influence through, I think this is this overall German attitude that is very much shaping German policy. So a big state says, with making compromises, with being in the EU, we can be stronger, and that is a good deal to be made. Making yourself smaller, even a large country, has little impact on the EU and even less globally. I think that's very much the summary of what I want to say. Thanks.
Yes, we are in many ways on the same page with the UK. We even believe that you're part of the EU because we pulled you in at the time, and we share the same views on Europe. At least we hope we do. But on closer examination, I think the relation between the Netherlands and the UK is more complicated. And just limit me to two things here, and that has to do with the diplomatic style of the UK, and secondly, with the views that the UK has on the EU, specifically on the euro, by the way. So those 2 points I want to pick up. One is the easy part, is the diplomatic style of the UK. The organisers, Hussein Kassim and Al Menon, did books on diplomacy in the EU of the member states, and we can read there that the UK is really pleased with its diplomatic style, and I think you even call it the Rolls-Royce style of dealing with the EU. I'm not quite sure whether that would be completely supported by the Dutch. Just one example is the Bloomberg speech was supposed to be given in Amsterdam. I really don't know to what extent that was actually checked with the Dutch government, whether Cameron was welcome. For sure, Rutte would not be there in Amsterdam, and he did not want to have a photo opportunity with Cameron in relation to a speech on in-out referendum. We just had the new government. The previous government, also by Rutte, was supported by Geert Wilders. And the first weeks of the new government, without Geert Wilders supporting it, the government was looking for a positive EU tone. And along comes David Cameron, and he says, I'm going to give an in-out speech in the Netherlands. I really doubt whether that was checked. It was just, oh, there's a friendly neighbour there, let's go. At least that was the impression. Also, the story wasn't probably checked with the Netherlands. Another example, I did some interviews with civil servants who deal a lot with the EU and the UK, and I get a lot of reluctant responses about the UK. The UK is not regarded as a very solid, reliable partner when it comes to striking deals and sticking to the deals. When it comes to diplomacy, interesting was also the sort of winning efforts of the hearts and minds, the efforts to win the hearts and minds of the Dutch by David Lidington, Minister of Europe here. He came to The Hague a couple of times, and he also gave a public presentation, and I had the pleasure to ask him, how did he see the future of the EU? And there he went on about the remorseless logic of the Eurozone. You know, Eurobonds, fiscal capacity, Commission becoming more political, Parliament becoming more, etc., etc. I'm not quite sure, but if you want to win the hearts and minds in the Netherlands, I mean, the remorseless logic story is not going to give you a lot of points. But that brings me to the second point about the relation between the Netherlands and the UK, and that is what kind of Europe do you see for yourself? And I know what this is all about here, you know, Cameron and backbenchers and having to settle this thing about Europe in his own party. But the discussion about the EU are for the Netherlands first and foremost about the Eurozone, the future of the Eurozone. And the discussions we're having in the Netherlands is the future of the Eurozone is not one of further centralization, but what we need to have are member states to reform. Because if member states reform, we really do not need to have all these additional measures to cement the euro together. Because, you know, let's face it, the way we talk about it in the Netherlands is that this centralization tendencies, the federalization tendencies, the Commission becoming the government, the fiscal capacity, has a lot to do with the failure of member states actually to reform. So we have actually integration by default, as I'd call it. Now, how does this affect the UK? Well, if I listen to Cameron every once in a while, he talks in a way of, that has got absolutely nothing to do with the UK, what the Eurozone decides. But it does have a lot to do with the UK, because the further we are heading with this deeper integration for the Eurozone, the bigger the difference between the ins and the outs will be. So we were actually hoping for the UK to come up with a view of the EU as a whole that also maintains the integrity of the EU. And that means that we have to somehow prevent this federalization in the EU that A, will not be supported, I'm afraid, not in the Netherlands, probably not in other countries too, and B, it won't work, presumably. So we need to have a Europe that is based on strong member states, and then if we get that, we will have more competition in the EU. We don't have this in-out tension that we currently have. It's a way to keep the EU intact. So actually, we would like to have the UK on board, but then on board on how's the EU as a whole going to look. And not just, you have the remorseless logic, even come tell us in The Hague as if we want to hear that. But we really need to have different views on Europe, and that's where we would like to see the UK. So to conclude, yes, the Netherlands really would like the UK to remain. We're afraid of the EU without the UK. But I think we'd also want you to sharp up your diplomatic skills and think some more about what Europe can work. And who knows, if you do that, we might actually love you. Thank you.
The Polish government, the Civic Platform, had a totally different idea of European integration than the current British government. Unlike London, Warsaw has invested a lot in strong partnership with supranational institutions, which, as you know, are not very popular here in this country. Its long-term objective was to adopt the common currency, unlike Britain, and it also invested a lot of political capital to nurture the relations with Germany, which, by the way, helped a lot Poland to navigate through increasingly multi-tier Europe. Now, when Poland was trying to solidify its position on the European Union stage, and actually, I would argue, turned from agenda taker to agenda shaper, Britain started contemplating a possible Brexit. And I think that it was that the best way to describe that relationship was the one that was offered by Timothy Garton-Ash, who said in 2013 that the Polish-British relationship is like two Spitfires flying to a different direction. Poland to the EU core and to Germany, and Britain to the Atlantic and the world emerging powers. Now, this metaphor, although it worked at that time, it doesn't hold any longer. As I said, in 2015, Poland changed course in European integration. Polish people elected a new government, which broadly shares Cameron's and British Conservatives' vision of European integration. And as you know, the Polish MEPs from the Law and Justice Party, they also sit with the British Conservatives in the European Parliament. So the new current government sees European integration and the European project very similar to the British Conservatives. And just to give you several examples. First of all, like Britain, the new Law and Justice, well, not that new any longer, Law and Justice government would like the EU to focus on single market issues rather than on transforming European integration into a fully fledged political project. Again, the new Polish government rather dislikes or feels not very comfortable with the notion of ever closer union. And it also shares Britain's distrust of Euro. One of the first decisions that the new Polish Prime Minister took was simply to abolish the office of the person who was in charge of Poland's preparation to join Euro. Now, this can probably help you understand why Warsaw supported most of Cameron's reforms that were eventually agreed in February 2015. It's basically because those reforms very much fitted in the Polish law and justice vision of European integration. Again, just to give you two examples. Well, law and justice government could easily sign up to the idea of, for instance, giving parliaments a red card, because it hoped that it would help to tame Commission's grouping competences. But it also knew, from the way I see it, that dominated by the one-party parliament would be unable to act as an independent actor on the EU stage. At the same time, the Law and Justice government didn't have, it seems to me, any problems in supporting the opt-outs for Britain from ever closer union, because perhaps at some point would also like to go down that path. It also seems to me that at the end, the Law and Justice government was more relaxed and flexible about the welfare package than many commentators, including myself, expected. And let me help you, let me explain you why it happened. Some would say, some would argue that Poland should have played a hardball with London when it comes to welfare package, because eventually Britain is a quite popular destination for Polish citizens who leave the country in search of jobs. But at the end, Poland agreed, as all the other member states, for the idea of the so-called migration break. And it seems to me that it's mainly because of the fact that the Polish government has feared the implications of Britain's leaving the EU more than it has feared the implications of, pulling the migration break. And this leads me to the second question: what would Brexit mean for Poland? Or rather, let me underline this difference, for the Polish government. So first of all, I would say that the new Polish, if Britain left the EU, the Polish government would struggle to defend its vision of Europe. But it would also struggle to defend its domestic reforms, which are not very popular in Brussels. As you know, the European Commission triggered the rule of law procedure against Poland. So definitely the Law and Justice government needs more allies in Brussels. Now, another factor, and the fear that the Polish government has, is Britain's withdrawal from the EU, it seems to me, would make the group of Euro-outs less vocal. As I said, this government doesn't really intend to bring Poland into Eurozone anytime soon, and it may fear that were Britain to leave the EU, the Europeans may be less willing to mind the interest of Euro-outs in favor of integration process, which, by the way, just to remind you, if Britain decides to leave in the EU, the reform package that was negotiated, including the safeguards for Euro-outs, will be ditched, basically, would be off the table. But it's not only about the political interest, but also about economics. And Britain's membership in the EU is vital for Poland also from the economic perspective. Britain is the second largest importer of the Polish goods and services. In 2015, just to give you a little bit of data, Polish exports to Britain amounted to 12 billion euro. And of course, the Brexit would put it at risk. Now, having said all this, if the British people, of course, the Brexit would be a huge blow to the current Polish government, but if British people decided to vote to leave, I think that the Polish government would go extra mile to help Britain, or post-Brexit Britain, to keep as close relationships as possible with the EU. And recently, I was asked by one of my colleagues, Tim Oliver, who runs a series of blogs at the LSE, whether Warsaw would have any red flags in the withdrawal negotiations, and if it had, what the red flags would be. And I was thinking about this during the weekend, and I thought that even though Poland would like to provide Britain with a good, favorable deal, and would like UK to maintain some sort of access to the single market, I think that Britain should not expect a free ride with Poland, because it would come with the string attached. And just to give you the free string, if I may, and then I will sum up, because I know that we are running out of time. So Poland's support for granting Britain with access to EU single market would basically would depend on Britain's continuous contribution to EU budget. So it seems to me that Poland is the largest beneficiary of EU funds, whereas Britain pays more to the EU budget than it gets back. And Polish government would probably expect Britain to carry on with payments, albeit at lesser level. What is also important to stress, if Britain wanted a full access to the single market, it should understand the single market is not only about free movement of goods, capitals, services, but also about free movement of people. And I imagine that Poland wouldn't like to compromise on this principle, especially that unlike Britain, it has seen it as one of the major EU successes, not failures. And finally, were British people to vote to leave the EU, there would be a problem or legal uncertainty around all the EU citizens living in the UK. As we know, the Polish citizens, they constitute the largest group of EU citizens in Britain. So I would assume that the Polish government would like to prioritize, would like to mitigate the risk or the uncertainty for its citizens. And I think that it would actually have quite strong cards together with European partners, because there are at least more than 1 million British citizens elsewhere in Europe, and Britain would struggle to obtain any legal protection for them if it did not offer the same for the EU citizens residing in the UK. So these are probably the red flags that post-Brexit Britain should expect. And just to finish off, I would like to say that obviously Brexit would be a huge blow to the current government. Because simply the Polish law and justice government needs more allies. Its decisions, the reforms that it conducted, basically alienated it on the European stage. But what is more important is that Brexit and withdrawal negotiations could also trigger Poland's own discussion about membership in the EU. Today, the Poles are still one of the most pro-European nations, but someone has argued, and I think I would agree, that once Poland starts paying more into EU budget than it receives, it may change. It's probably not going to be even the next multi-annual financial framework, but it will come. And the Poles may be then more vulnerable to Eurosceptic resentments. Then, if this is so, then we might start hearing more about Polexit than Brexit, actually.